BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. This is the first time that Zodiac Monday has moved into a second episode, or a two-parter, if you will. And on Zodiac Monday, I always say that I'm going to try and give you guys the shout-outs for supporters who have made a donation to help BlackBoxOnlineRadio, and I would like to begin with that in just a second, but one more time, there's a link for that in the description box. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday, or in this case, the Anything Goes Friday segment, Zodiac Monday Part 2 this week. And you can always hit the like button and subscribe. Those are some great free ways that you can help out this channel. And the first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, I thank you so much for your regular support. It is greatly appreciated. And the next one is from Stuart McAdam. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to begin with the supporter shoutouts, because Stuart is asking several Zodiac Killer questions in his BuyMeACoffee.com donation. Have a wonderful day, Ned. I'd like to know your thoughts about the events leading up to the Zodiac Killer's crime at Lake Herman Road. Do you think he followed William Crowe, as Michael Cole believes? Do you feel like the last person to drive past David and Betty Lou actually heard gunshots, or do you think their imagination told them that after they read it in other reports? And how do you think the Lake Herman Road attack unfolded? Do you think the Zodiac waited for a while before getting out of the car? Do you think he blitzed it and fired a warning shot to get them out of the car? Or do you think that he hauled David out, shot him, and then fired at Betty Lou wildly as she fled? Appreciate your thoughts as always. Stuart McAdam, thank you so much for your donation. And firstly, the Zodiac Killer committed multiple homicides between 1968 and 69. The Lake Herman Road murders were the first Zodiac crime, and they took place on December 20th of 1968, and they saw the deaths of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. Now, the first question is, do you think the Zodiac Killer followed William Crowe, as Michael Cole believes? William Crowe was the person who was actually driving his girlfriend's car. I believe it's his girlfriend's car, but he's in the driver's seat, and it's a newer car, and they pull into the parking lot at Lake Herman Road before the Lake Herman Road murders took place, before the Jensen Faraday murders, I should say, and then he gets out to tinker with the motor a little bit, and then there's this other car that drives by, and some people think that that was the Zodiac Killer. Now, the famous story that was shared on Tom Voigt's channel, Zodiac Killer Official, is that William Crowe had a wavering testimony. He had somewhat of a split testimony. He had a reversal about who was driving the car that allegedly, I repeat, allegedly chased him, because William Crowe gets back in the driver's seat and he drives away, and then the car follows him, this suspicious vehicle. At first, he said that there were two men in the car, and he couldn't make out any discernible features. And then he has the reversal and states that, okay, it was a single man, and he resembled the Zodiac Killer's composite sketch. So I'm believing the first, and I wish I had a more scholarly answer for you, but I do not think that that was the Zodiac Killer, and I think that that sounds like either he got a little bit confused over the years, or let's just leave it at that, but I do stand. So my ultimate answer is no, I don't believe that William Crowe was followed by the Zodiac. The next question is, do you feel like the last person to drive past David and Betty Lou actually heard gunshots, or do you think that their imagination told them that after they read reports? I wish I had a better answer for you in this one. I'm completely uncertain, and I maybe need to either take some more time to think about it, but I think it's going to be the same answer. I suppose something like that is possible, but I mean, Stuart brings up a very good point. People can have their memories affected by the media as it unfolds, which may have happened to William Crowe in his testimony. How do you think the Lake Herman Road attack unfolded is the next question. And this is a very good one, because that's what I was discussing on the most recent Zodiac Monday, and there were these two scenarios about how the killer could have got out of his car now at Lake Herman Road. David Faraday pulls up to a place that's rather close to the road. So the killer had to pull his car in next to them, and he's actually closer to the fence on the interior of the parking lot, and he exits the car. And I particularly like the theory about how David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen are sitting in the driver's seat and passenger seat respectively, and then the killer walks around to the driver's side to shoot the male victim first, and then David and Betty Lou try to run and escape out the passenger side door, and then the killer just simply does a half circle around and shoots both of them. And, I mean, that is something that did particularly catch my eye, but right now I would like to give a shout-out to Joel Mahan, because he left a response to that, which I think is pretty good. And this is what Joel has written out on the most recent Zodiac Killer news report. At Lake Herman, there were 2 shots fired into the backseat window. I'm guessing David Faraday got out and walked over to the right-hand side and confronted the shooter with a WTF, and then he told Betty Lou to run and was shot in the right ear, and his body was found on the passenger side of the Rambler. I also think it's quite likely that the shooter forced them off the road into the turnout. The reason why I liked that arrangement of the words was because Joel was talking about how could the Zodiac's car have been following them for a while, and then they pull over, like, okay, who is this guy? This car's been following us for a while, and then they just pull over to the turnout on the side of Lake Herman Road. Well, let's just see what happens. And then the killer's car pulls in next to them, and then David gets out and is thinking, goodness, like, what is going on? I'm just going to ask the guy why he's following us. And David was actually somewhat of a tough guy, so they say. I mean, he was a very good wrestler, and he wouldn't have had a problem confronting somebody. And is it possible that he removed his class ring because he wanted to get into a fist fight and he didn't want to either damage the ring or punch somebody in the face with the ring on, maybe in a gesture of good spirit, but of course it turned out to be the killer, and he just blindsided them. But that would mean that they were forced onto the side of the road, or David chose to pull over voluntarily. And the reason why Betty Lou was running away was, once David saw the gun, he told Betty Lou to run for it, and then he was shot, and then the killer turned on Betty Lou. So I mean, I just like the way that Joel worded that particular comment. So much appreciation right there. And if anybody has any ideas about how they think the Lake Herman Road murders happened, you can put your idea in the comment section down below. And as you see, your comment may be worked into a future episode of the Zodiac Killer News Report. Now, here's one, though, that we do have to address from Stuart's questions. And that is that, do you think the attack at Lake Herman Road unfolded with the Zodiac waiting for a while before getting out? And I have to say no. Do I think that the Zodiac killer waited before getting out of his car? No, because as of now, I am still under the belief that this is the first crime committed by the Zodiac killer. I think that this guy would be dealing with a lot of physical nervousness. He is perhaps has it completely under control. Maybe not like his hands are shaking or he is just like sweating profusely. Not that type of nervousness, just the, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to commit a crime. I have thought about this so much. I have a perfect plan. I'm going to murder these people and then I'm going to get out of there. That's what he's thinking. So he pulls in to the turnout, and I think he got out of the car very, very swiftly, because he knew what he would have been doing. And then David's body was found on the passenger side of the car, but he had been driving the car. So Joel could be completely right that David walked over just to see what was going on, and the guy pulls out the gun. I do not think the Zodiac was waiting in the car for very long. Now, this thing about did the Zodiac fire a warning shot? It's possible, but still unsolved case, completely up in the air. I wish I had a better way of putting it, but it's a very good set of questions from Stuart McAdam. And now moving on to the next segment here on the Zodiac Killer News Report, I was reading the book So I See You Don't Paint Houses, which is about the Zodiac killer suspect Richard Gaikowski. It's written by Jeremy Berthiaume, and I was reminded of some things that had been shared in a YouTube video made by Evan from Texas that came out in 2020, when he was looking at the Zodiac killer's handwriting, and pointed out that there are a lot of odd things about the way the Zodiac killer wrote letters, because the Zodiac wasn't merely a serial killer, he also created these letters and cryptograms and greeting cards, and Evan from Texas put forward the possibility that what if the Zodiac killer were a police officer, and he was intentionally using the manual of handwriting disguising techniques, so, like using a police manual to disguise all of this handwriting, so that somebody, any forensic investigator, would figure it out very easily that these letters were written by a member of law enforcement. And of course, Evan from Texas has Hal Snook as his Zodiac killer suspect. Hal Snook was not only a forensic investigator, he was also a forensic chemist and the founder of the California Narcotics Officers Association. But in the book about Richard Gaikowski, So I See You Don't Paint Houses, it focuses the investigation in a different way, and Jeremy Berthiaume is proposing a possibility as to why there are all of these odd things in the Zodiac letters, the handwriting, the tilting to the side, the spacing in words, and he proposes that these are creative ideas that are coming from someone who is of a literary circle, someone who is a writer, that's the simpler explanation. And he doesn't address any of those comments from Evan from Texas. That is my response to it. Was just pointing out how different people have different ideas as to why the Zodiac killer has odd line spacing and word choices. He's proposing that this is somebody who was a writer. Now, there was another section in the book, So I See You Don't Paint Houses, that talked about another possible inspiration for the Zodiac killer, about why somebody would go on to become a serial killer in a short amount of time. And one possible influence on the Zodiac killer could have been the Starkweather Fugate murders from the late 1950s, particularly in 1957-58. Thereabouts, it's December of 57 into 1958. And this is, well, again, tying into the Zodiac killer suspect Richard Gaikowski, who was from South Dakota, from Watertown, South Dakota, actually, and the Starkweather Fugate murders were a crime spree that went from Nebraska into Wyoming. And I'll just read a little bit of an introductory piece about this, and it says, this is actually from LincolnLibraries.org, just citing the source. The names of Charles Raymond Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate hold a place in history as Nebraska's most notorious mass murderers. Their saga began when 19-year-old Starkweather killed a gas station attendant in 1957, and then late in January of 1958, Charlie and his 14-year-old girlfriend, Carol, began an 8-day murder spree that started with the members of Carol's family and eventually led to 10 total deaths before they were captured on the highway outside of Douglas, Wyoming. Tried and convicted of murder, Charles Starkweather was executed in a Nebraska State Penitentiary on June 25th of 1959. Okay, though, Carol Ann Fugate actually has her place in history as being the youngest woman ever to have been tried and convicted of first-degree murder, and she would have been 14 years old at the times of these crimes. And their story went on to become the inspiration for multiple movies, Natural Born Killers most notably, and I fully admit, I'm going to make this as a confession to you, I have not seen Natural Born Killers. I need to put that at the top of my list, but they were also the inspiration for the movie California, California spelled with a K. It features Brad Pitt and Juliette Lewis and the roles based on them, and Brad Pitt plays a serial killer named Early Grace. Very loose inspiration, of course, as you can see, on different locations and so on, and it also has this journalist that is following them around and doing an expose on the mind of a murderer and dealing with some types of inside versus outside discussions. I loved the film California, and I also saw they made a movie called Starkweather in 2004. I haven't seen that one yet, but I'm going to be putting that on my list as well. And with this particular case, you can see that there was a very large amount of media coverage. And even in the book, So I See You Don't Paint Houses, it even talks about how there was a lot of attention that would have been put on this, and somebody from the Midwest, albeit not Nebraska but South Dakota, like Richard Gaikowski, could have resonated with this in some particular way. But the other point to remember is that true crime cases were not shared in a very large, like, of national proportion. They weren't shared throughout the national media the way they are today, and certainly there was no internet. I mean, I've talked to multiple people who said that they didn't learn about the Zodiac killer until the 1980s, even some of you guys in the comments section that said that was the first time that they learned about the Zodiac. But the Starkweather Fugate murders were rather widely publicized. Now, the way that this crime would have unfolded would have been that there's this early period where Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate are living in her house for a period of days after Carol's family has been murdered. She denied all involvement in the murders, but Charles Starkweather would later go on to say that she was actually a participant, because Charles Starkweather was found guilty of murdering her stepfather, her mother, and her little sister. A particular crime that he said Carol Ann Fugate committed was the murder of her infant sister, and she was also an active participant in other murders. She denied the whole thing. She said that he told her that her family was being held hostage somewhere, and they would die if she did not go along with him, but he was still responsible for all the murders. It just comes down to the story of who do you want to believe. But Carol Ann Fugate spent 17 years in prison, and then she actually relocated to the state of Michigan once she was released. As I said, tried and convicted for first-degree murder, but she was ultimately let out of jail. And it's a very, very sad story, and it is really something that is rather connected to the Zodiac case in an odd way, because I said that these people are known as the natural-born killers. Like, you can find that on some true crime websites. That's how they refer to them, as they inspired natural-born killers, inspired California, the movie Starkweather, but also it became the inspiration for the movie Badlands. And it's possible that the Zodiac killer directly referenced the movie Badlands in a card that was mailed in 1974. And yes, of course that card came in, but that is an unconfirmed Zodiac killer communication. And I would like to just get to the text of the Badlands card that was mailed in May of 1974, and it says, "Sirs, I would like to express my consternation concerning your poor taste and lack of sympathy for the public, as evidenced by your running of ads for the movie Badlands, featuring the blurb, 'In 1959, most people were killing time. Kit and Holly were killing people. In light of recent events, this kind of murder glorification can only be deplorable at best. Not that glorification of violence was ever justifiable. Why don't you show some concern for public sensibilities and cut the ad?'" So, one point that I heavily downplayed in the past was that there was a statement on ZodiacKiller.com that said that in 1974, the Zodiac had reinvented himself as a film buff. Firstly, there's the Exorcist letter in January of 74, and there is the Count Marco letter, which has a line about saying that he's the Red Phantom, red with rage, and that may be a movie reference, because it's not saying Red Phantom, it's actually saying the Phantom. That's what he's calling himself. And I mean, how many movies have a character called the Phantom of the Opera, or it could also be talking about the Phantom comics? And I mean, there could be some type of film connection there, possibly, but definitely with the movie Badlands. Now, this is an unconfirmed communication, but when you look at the envelope of this particular card, yeah, it does seem very similar to the handwriting of the Zodiac killer, and I'm rather undecided, but I always have to be a little bit naturally skeptical and say that I think that this person, or I think that this card was fabricated by a different person, because I just have my doubts. But what do you think? Do you think the Badlands card is authentic? And there's one point, though, that I also want to share with you guys in a completely different direction. It's just recently on the channel, I've been talking to you a lot about the Zodiac killer suspect, Joseph Paul Franklin. He is the subject of 2 publications out by Sam Fisher, as well as the books The Racist Killer and The Killer's Shadow, and he was responsible for multiple homicides, as well as the attempted murder of Larry Flint of Hustler magazine. And one point relates to how The Zodiac killer symbol is somewhat similar to a symbol that is used by neo-Nazis and white supremacists, and that's why Sam Fisher said he began investigating Joseph Paul Franklin. He wanted to find a serial killer who also had this neo-Nazi or white supremacist connection, and it's a circle with a cross going through it. So I decided to read up a little bit more on this particular type of cross, because you can see the zodiac symbol used in astrology, right? The different star signs, and even on the graphic for AstroPsych 400, there's also a circle with a cross going through it. It just has more symbols attached to it. But the Zodiac Killer symbol, the circle that has the cross-haired symbol, some people think that that is a Celtic cross, one of which was Randy Kenny, who proposed Louis Myers as a Zodiac suspect. He said very clearly that that was the reason why it was chosen, was because it's a Celtic cross. Now, when you look at certain images of a Celtic cross, you can notice that it is quite different than some other crosses that are used by the Christian churches, particularly that it has a circle that is going around. And I decided to read up on that, and the exact origin of that is not identified, but there's a legend that St. Patrick himself chose the Celtic cross because he wanted to incorporate something from Ireland's past with, well, Ireland's future in his mind, and the circle represents eternity. Then, after World War II in the United States of America, that symbol was hijacked by neo-Nazis and white supremacists, and it becomes, taken over and used in some of their iconography, if I'm using the word correctly, and it's particularly the black circle with a black cross, or sometimes it's a white circle with a white cross. In fact, in almost all, maybe all of the depictions of this neo-Nazi cross, it looks like it's either black or white. And one of them, I do confess, looks very similar to what the Zodiac would have been wearing at Lake Berryessa. However, a particular difference with this neo-Nazi cross is almost always it looks like there's a double-edged line, like the line has almost two edges, and there's almost some additional inking, for lack of a better term, there, and that's not how the cross was described at Lake Berryessa by Brian Hartnell, the surviving victim. Lake Berryessa, of course, was the only time the Zodiac Killer wore his signature hood, which has the black costume mask that had the dicky flap that went down, and on the center of the flap, there was a circle with a cross going through it. That symbol was, of course, used by the Zodiac Killer in his communications. It is indeed his symbol, but I think the only thing that would give any type of defense to the Zodiac Killer using this type of cross, which, as I said, post-World War II, so we're dealing after 1945 and the Zodiac murders taking place in 1969, I think the only type of connection could actually be that, okay, it was taken from some other flag or some other already existing piece of fabric, and the Zodiac just simply cut that out and sewed it onto an existing hood, and that's why there was that very neat circle with a cross going through it. But it's similar, but it still has those differences that I have talked about in a lot of these illustrations and depictions. And the reason why I started reading up on this was I featured a photo of the Simple Teak Shooter. The Simple Teak Shooter. What did I really say? The Sikh Temple Shooter. I can't believe I did that. Simple Teak Sikh Temple Shooter. It's like earlier I almost said foovie instead of movie because I was trying to say film and movie at the same time. I do that all the time. I mean, goodness, I'm so sorry. But yes, I featured a photo of the Sikh Temple Shooter, and he had a circle with a cross going through it, and it featured the number 14. And you guys will know that the Zodiac Killer also liked the number 14. It was featured on the Halloween card that was mailed on October 27th of 1970 in a very direct way. Like, the Zodiac really wanted to pay attention to the number 14, and I tried to find, is there some type of 14 connection to the neo-Nazis? And there is, but it comes from not exactly the neo-Nazis. It's a group called the Order, and the person who came up with a 14-word slogan, which I'm not even going to read off, but there's a 14-word slogan or motto or belief that this group had that one of their most prominent members came up with one night when he said he was just in bed and kind of either in a dream or half asleep, and this 14-word white power idea came to mind. So that's what that stands for. I couldn't find the exact date when he came up with it, but it seems almost certainly that it's after 1969. 1969. And also, the group The Order was actually responsible for the murder of Alan Berg. That's mostly what people would associate them with. I did one episode about Alan Berg here on Black Box Online Radio. He was the radio host who was, murdered by The Order. And that was the first time on BBOR that I had talked about a true crime case that was not an unsolved mystery and just giving commentary on the subject. And, that was somewhat of a turning point for the channel. I invite you guys to go back and listen to any of those old Black Box recordings back from 2018 and 19 and so on, if you're curious about other cases and looking at criminal psychology as well as the social events that surround these true crime stories. But right now I would like to turn it over to you and just give your responses to the challenge questions. The final one would be, do you think there's any possibility that the Zodiac was a neo-Nazi or white supremacist? And you can put your ideas in the comment section down below. The other questions have also been proposed throughout this episode, and I really want to know what you guys think about the Lake Herman Road murders. Feel free to share something. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and there is always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram, and I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Goodbye.